Hello, and thank you for joining me for a reading of the Hermetica. We're going to begin here with a brief overview of the introduction. A forgotten spiritual classic, the Hermetica is a collection of writings attributed to Thoth, a mythical ancient Egyptian sage whose wisdom is said to have transformed him into a god. Thoth, who was venerated in Egypt from at least 3000 BCE, is credited with the invention of sacred hieroglyphic writing, and his figure, portrayed as a scribe with the head of an ibis, can be seen in many temples and tombs. He is the dispatcher of divine messages and recorder of all human deeds. In the great hall of judgment, the afterlife court of the gods, Osiris, Thoth would establish whether the deceased had acquired spiritual knowledge and purity, and so deserved a place in the heavens. Thoth was said to have revealed the Egyptians all knowledge on astronomy, architecture, geometry, medicine, and religion. He was believed by the ancient Greeks to be the architect of the pyramids. Greeks who were in awe of the knowledge and spirituality of the Egyptians identified Thoth with their own god, Hermes, the messenger of the gods and the guider of souls in the realm to the dead. To distinguish the Egyptian Hermes from their own, they gave him the title Tris Magistus, meaning thrice great. To honor his sublime wisdom, the book attributed to him became collectively known as the Hermetica. The history of the Hermetica. The early origins of the Hermetica are shrouded in mystery, but the evidence suggests it is a direct descendant of the ancient philosophy of the Egyptians. However, the handful of surviving works attributed to Hermes are not written in ancient Egypt hieroglyphs, but in Greek, Latin, and Coptic. They were collated in the city of Alexandria in Egypt during the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE. Here, the Hermetica philosophy helped inspire some of the greatest intellectual achievements of the ancient world. Alexandria was a great center of learning, surpassing even Athens. Its founder, Alexander the Great, had conquered and united Greece, Persia, Egypt, and India into one vast empire. Cultures that had grown up more or less independently were brought together, and there was no bigger melting pot than Alexandria. The Hermetica and Islam. History shows us that wherever the works of Hermes have been studied and venerated, civilizations have flourished. Pagan scholars and sages fled to the newly emerging Arab culture, taking their knowledge and the Hermetica writings with them. 200 years later, the Muslims created an empire whose learning and scientific achievements were unsurpassed. By the beginning of the 9th century, the first university was established in Baghdad, called the House of Wisdom, where many pagan works were translated. The sciences that had reached such heights in Alexandria were significantly developed, and the ancient pagan spiritual world wisdom was covertly studied and practiced. From its exalted position amongst the sacred scriptures of Egyptian spirituality, the Hermetica became the secret inspiration for an important undercurrent in Islamic philosophy and the holy book of unorthodox religious secrets such as the Sabians. Why would we have never heard of the mysterious Sabians had they not come into their conflict with the religious authorities of their day? Several centuries after the death of its founder Muhammad, Islam was beginning to succumb to the same desire for orthodoxy that had arisen in the Christian West. Heretics were to be rooted out, if necessary with violence. In 830 CE, a powerful caliph was passing through the city of Haran when he noticed the strangely dressed Sabians and questioned their leaders. Asked to produce their sacred texts, they returned with the books of Hermes. The genius philosopher-scientist Thabit ibn Qurra was a Sabian who in 810 CE wrote the following rousing defense of Hermetic paganism. We are the heirs and propagators of paganism. Happy is he, for the sake of paganism, bears the burden of persecution with firm hope. Who else has civilized the world and built cities if not the nobles and kings of paganism? Who else have set in order the harbors and the rivers? And who else have taught the hidden wisdom? To whom else has the deity revealed itself, given oracles, and told about the future, if not the famous men amongst the pagans? The pagans have made known of all of this. They have discovered the art of healing the body. They have also made known the art of healing the soul. They have filled the earth with settled forms of government and with wisdom, which is the highest good. Without paganism, the world would be empty and miserable. Thabit ibn Qurra. Hermes and the Reawakening of Europe. With the Arab Empire becoming increasingly intolerant, the owners of the Hermetic books traveled in search of a safe refuge. In the 15th century, many fled to the tolerant city-state of Florence in northern Italy, where this wisdom again inspired a great cultural flowering. In 1438, the Byzantine scholar Gamisto Plethion made available to the awestruck Florentines the entire lost works of Plato. These and other pagan works were translated into Latin for the first time. The ruler of Florence, the philanthropist and scholar Cosimo de' Medici, established a new Platonic academy, a group of intellectuals and mystics who found their inspiration in the ancient pagan philosophy. It profoundly influenced the great names like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Botticelli, and Raphael, who began painting pictures of the ancient pagan gods. Botticelli's Venus and Mars, for example, was painted at a precise astrological moment as a talisman of occult radiance, capable of magically transporting the viewer to an altered state of spiritual awareness. Cosimo sent out agents to look for other lost pagan works that might still be awaiting discovery. In 1460, they had come across some of the lost works of the thrice great Hermes and brought them to Florence. The Florentines, already reeling from the discovery that an ancient civilization of immense sophistication had risen and fallen nearly 2,000 years before them, now believed they had in their hands the words of the most ancient sage of them all. Cosimo ordered his young Greek scholar Marsilio Ficino to cease his work on translating Plato and begin immediately on the new Egyptian text. Ficino had it ready to go in time to read Cosimo just before his death. The unifying religion. In England, the works of Hermes had a profound effect on the circle of courtiers surrounding Elizabeth I. Sir Philip Sidney, Sir Walter Raleigh, John Donne, Christopher Marlowe, William Shakespeare, George Chapman, and Francis Bacon were all acquainted with the works of the Egyptian sage. Elizabeth's personal astrologer, whom she referred to as her philosopher, was the enigmatic Hermeticist John Dee. He was a brilliant mathematician and the first person to translate the complete works of Euclid into English. Dr. Dee, who owned the greatest library in England and his home was regarded as the third university to Oxford and Cambridge, he was visited by scholars from all over Europe and made frequent journeys to Prague, where he had first detailed commentaries on the Hermetica being written. At this time, Prague was the capital of Bohemia, an enlightened republic where Hermetic scholars, Platonic philosophers, Jewish rabbis, and scientists of every nation found sanctuary at the court of Rudolf II. Europe was being ravaged by the wars of religion between Protestants and Catholics, and in Bohemia, another way was proposed, Hermeticism. Evangelists of the new Egyptian religion of the thrice great Hermes, such as Giordano Bruno, traveled extensively in Europe. Bruno interpreted the new sun-centered cosmos proposed by Copernicus in an entirely new mystical way, as the rising of a new sun and the dawning of a new age. He believed the Egyptian religion of Hermes was the ancestor of the Greek god mystery schools, the religion of Moses and the Jews, and the birthplace of Christianity. In Bruno's imagination, it was now poised to become the unifying religion in which Jews, all denominations of Christians, Platonic humanists, and even Muslims could meet and resolve their differences. Bruno's courage and conviction was no more clearly demonstrated than in his decision to return to Italy. Within a short time, he was arrested by the Roman Catholic Church. He endured 8 years of torture during which he refused to recant. In 1600, was led out into the Square Flowers in Rome and was ceremonially burnt alive. The vision of a universal Hermetic religion was fated to fade, but its influences remained strong amongst visionaries and scientists. Sir Isaac Newton, for example, like many men of his time, was passionately interested in alchemy, the patron god of which the thrice great Hermes. Indeed, the word alchemy means from Egypt. The astronomer Kepler published quotes from the Hermetica in his greatest works. On the harmony of the world in 1640, the poor John Milton celebrated the wisdom of Hermes. The demise of the thrice great Hermes. At the same time as Milton was writing, however, the ground was being cut away from underneath the authenticity of the Hermetica. Previously, those works had been believed to be that of extreme antiquity, dating back to the time of the Pharaohs. In 1614, a scholar called Isaac Casaubon published a textual analysis of the Hermetica, which showed quite correctly that the grammar, vocabulary, form, and content of the Greek versions of these works dated them to no earlier than the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE. They were not written by ancient Egyptian sage, he claimed, but by scholars in the city of Alexandria. Their philosophy was nothing more than an exotic blend of Greek, Christian, and Jewish philosophy mixed up with astrology and magic. The Egyptian names that pepper the text were more decoration and ornament. Casaubon was one of the most brilliant Greek scholars of his time, and with the encouragement of the Christian status quo, his damning criticism was generally accepted. Casaubon had dealt the Egyptian sage a fatal blow, and the books of Hermes were destined to be forgotten as fakes and forgeries. The wisdom of the Pharaohs. When Casaubon was writing, very little was actually known about ancient Egypt. The hieroglyphs themselves were not translated until 2 centuries after his death. Consequently, many modern scholars now believe that he was wrong to see the Hermetica philosophy as a 2nd century invention, especially since the discovery of the pyramid texts of Saqqara at the end of the last century. These hieroglyphs over 5,000 years old and yet contain doctrines that are identical to those expounded in the Hermetica. This suggests that the Hermetica may indeed contain the wisdom of the Pharaohs, which scholars in 2nd century Alexandria reworked for a contemporary readership. The Hermetica contains passages reminiscent of Jewish, Christian, and Greek works, and Casaubon saw this as proof that the Hermetica is a forgery, created from a hodgepodge of these other philosophies. Alexandria was in such eclectic environment that this is plausible. The ancients themselves believed, however, these traditions were influenced by the Egyptian philosophy contained within the Hermetica. The Jews lived for many years in exile in Egypt, and their greatest prophet Moses was brought up as an Egyptian. Many clearly Christians lived in Egypt, and the Greeks were in awe of the Egyptians, compared to whom they felt were like children. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus writes, "The Egyptians are religious to excess, beyond any other nation in the world. They are meticulous in everything which concerns their religion. If it was only, if I may put it so, the day before yesterday the Greeks came to know the origin and form of the various gods. The names of all the gods came to Greece from Egypt. For the names of all the gods have been known in Egypt from the beginning of time." The Hermetica in early Christianity. Hermetic philosophy also influenced Christianity through the Alexandrian church fathers St. Clement and St. Aurine, who synthesized pagan and Christian religious doctrines. It is due to such theologians that the Hermetic concept of, quote, "the Word" is found in the opening verse of the Gospel of John. "In the beginning was the Word." Hermes, Thoth, was known to the scientists as the scribe of the God and master of the Word. In the Hermetica, God utters a word which claims the chaotic waters of creation. The Word is even called the Son of God. In Christianity, Jesus Christ, who is also called the Son of God, is identified as an embodiment of the power of the Word. St. Augustine of Hippo, the influential 4th century theologian who is familiar with the works of Hermes, writes, "That which is called the Christian religion existed among the ancients, and never did not exist, from the beginning of the human race until Christ came into the flesh, at which the true religion was already existed, to be called so Christianity." The influence of the Hermetica on early Christianity is beyond doubt. In 1945, the works of Hermes were discovered amongst scriptures belonging to the Gnostic Christians of the 1st century CE. According to a note on one of the texts, early Christian communities possessed many copies of the works of Hermes. Just a few yards from the place where these scriptures were found, in ancient Egypt tombs. These were inhabited by early Christian hermits such as St. Pachomus, the founder of the first Christian monastic communities. The walls of these tombs are covered in hieroglyphs ascribed to the great god Thoth. They describe a spiritual rebirth into knowledge of God. In such places, early Gnostic Christians pored over the Hermetica. Under its powerful influence, they composed their own philosophy of saving gnosis, knowledge, a direct knowledge of God bestowed upon the Messiah Jesus. All the evidence suggests that Casaubon was wrong to simply dismiss the Hermetica as some cobbled-together mixture of many different philosophies. The Hermetica was undoubtedly written by Alexandrian scholars for a Greek-speaking readership, but it contains a powerful echo of the ancient wisdom on which it was based. It offers us the best windows available to gaze into Egypt's remotest past. With its help, we can understand the mystical vision that inspired the awesome Giza pyramids. But what is the Hermetica philosophy that has held us such profound fascination for some of the greatest minds in history? The mind of God. At the heart of Hermes' teaching is one simple idea. God is a big mind. Everything which exists is a thought within the mind of God. This book is a thought in the mind of God. Your body is a thought in the mind of God. These ideas which are being discussed are thoughts in the mind of God. How can we understand this? Consider for a moment your own experience. Thoughts and feelings exist within your mind. You know the outer world around you because your senses give you information which you then also experience with your mind. When your mind is completely unconscious, you don't experience anything. Ultimately, everything that exists in your life is a thought within your mind. Your mind, however, is limited by being trapped in a physical body. Imagine for a moment that it is not. Imagine that it is free to be conscious of everything, at all times and in all places. Then that everything that is, has been, and will be, would exist as a thought within your mind. This is the nature of God's mind. God is not limited by a physical body. God is the big mind within which everything exists. Hermes describes the mind of God as the oneness with which unites everything. What does this mean? Again, look at your own experience. You experience many different things with your mind. Right now, you're reading this book. Before that, you may have been eating or walking in the country. Yet all of those things are different experiences by one thing, your mind. It is the oneness that unites all of your experience. In the same way, God's mind is the oneness which unites everything. Hermes says that the oneness contains all opposites. This paradox can be understood by once more looking at the nature of your own mind. Some things you experience are hot and others are cold. Some are bright and some are dark. Some you call good and others bad. Nothing that you experience can be both cold and hot because they are opposites, yet both cold and hot are experiences which you have. Your mind is the one thing which contains all opposites. Hermes teaches that the mind of the human being is made in the image of God's big mind. If we can free our mind from the limitation imposed by the physical body, we can experience the mind of God. We were created with the specific purpose of learning to do this. This is the spiritual goal of human life. To reach this destination, we must expand our awareness. We must use the power of our little minds to reach out to God's big mind. To help us do this, Hermes narrates a dramatic story of how God created and maintains the cosmos. It is through this appreciation and appreciating the awesome beauty of the cosmos and understanding the fundamental laws by which it functions that we can come to know the mind of God. It was this vision which fired the imaginations of the great minds of history. It inspired the birth of science by encouraging them to explore the mind of God. By seeking to discover more of how the universe works, some great modern scientists such as Albert Einstein and Stephen Hawking still describe science as an attempt to understand the mind of God. The Hermetic philosophy places man at the very center of God's creation. Hermes declared that man is a marvel. With his mind, he may not only understand the universe, but even come to know God. He is not a mortal body which he will live and die. He is an immortal soul which, through the experience of the spiritual rebirth, may become a God.